That moment still haunts me. The kind of memory that lingers in the quiet spaces of your mind, replaying when you least expect it. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. It wasn't supposed to happen at all. I remember the dim glow of the bedside lamp, the sound of my own ragged breathing, the heat of the moment. And then a presence, a shift in the air. My body knew before my mind did, the unmistakable weight of someone watching. When I turned my head, my stepson was there, standing in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes locked onto me. Everything froze. A breath, a heartbeat, a realization. And just like that, the world I had built, the life I had carefully curated, began to fracture, splintering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. I should start at the beginning, though I don't know if that makes any of this easier to explain. My name is Evelyn. I met Mark when I was 32, fresh out of a long, disappointing relationship and utterly convinced that love, real, lasting love, was just a well-crafted illusion. But Mark was different. He was steady, dependable, the kind of man who made promises and kept them. He was older than me by nearly a decade, with a quiet confidence that drew me in like gravity. And he had a son. Nathan was 15 when I entered his life, a lanky, quiet boy who had inherited his father's sharp eyes and stubborn jawline. He was polite but distant, still nursing the wounds of his parents' messy divorce. His mother, Allison, had left Mark for another man, and Nathan, though he never said much about it, carried the weight of that betrayal in the way he held himself, rigid, always on guard. Blending into their lives was harder than I had anticipated. Mark and I married after 2 years of dating, and I moved into their house, a beautiful, sprawling home just outside of Seattle, perched on the edge of a thick, evergreen forest. It was meant to be a fresh start, a new beginning. But some walls, no matter how much time you give them, never fully come down. Nathan and I coexisted in a polite, distant truce. I was not his mother, and I never tried to be. But I cared for him in the small ways I could, leaving an extra plate for him at dinner even when he claimed he wasn't hungry, making sure his favorite brand of cereal was always stocked in the pantry. He acknowledged these gestures with curt nods, a silent language of uneasy gratitude. Mark, ever the optimist, assured me Nathan just needed time. But time stretched into years, and still, an invisible chasm remained between us. Then, Nathan turned 18, graduated high school, and left for college, taking his unspoken resentment with him. Or so I thought. The night it happened, Mark was away on business. The house, usually so full of his presence, felt cavernous, the silence pressing in on me. It had been a warm evening, and I had left the balcony door slightly ajar, letting in the cool scent of pine and damp earth. I had been in the bedroom, lost in the heat of an affair I had never meant to begin, when I felt it, an unseen weight in the room, a shift in the air. And then I saw him, Nathan, standing in the doorway, watching. And just like that, everything unraveled. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Nathan stood frozen in the doorway, his face unreadable, but his eyes, those sharp, piercing eyes, held mine like a trap. My mind scrambled for an explanation, an excuse, anything to undo what had just happened. But there was no undoing it. The sheets tangled around my body felt suffocating, the heat that had burned through me only moments ago now replaced by a sick, icy dread. "Nathan," I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond. He just stood there, the dim hallway light casting shadows over his face. I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The silence that followed was unbearable. I sat up, wrapping the sheets around myself, my heart hammering so violently it felt like it might shatter my ribs. My lover, Daniel, sat beside me, still, his breath unsteady. "What the hell just happened?" he whispered. I barely heard him. My mind was racing. Nathan was supposed to be at school. He wasn't supposed to be here. Why had he come back? Had he suspected something? Had he heard something? And what would he do now? "I have to talk to him," I said, already pushing myself off the bed. "Evelyn," Daniel reached for me, but I pulled away. "This isn't about you," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. I barely registered him, sighing as I grabbed my robe, tying it around me with shaking hands before stepping into the hallway. Nathan's door was closed. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the knob, my stomach twisted in knots. What could I even say? I knocked, gently at first. No answer. Nathan, I said softly. Please open the door. Nothing. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried again, this time firmer. Nathan, we need to talk. A beat of silence. Then, finally, the door swung open. Nathan stood there, his expression blank but his eyes stormy. The boy who had always kept his distance, who had never let me in now, for the first time, he looked at me like he truly saw me. And he hated what he saw. What do you want? His voice was low, tight with something I couldn't quite name. I inhaled sharply. I didn't know you were home. His lip curled slightly, a ghost of a bitter smile. Yeah, I figured. Shame coiled in my gut. Nathan, Save it. He shook his head. I don't want to hear whatever lie you're about to tell. I flinched. It's not. His eyes flashed. It's not what? What it looks like. He let out a short, humorless laugh. That's the line you're going with. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Nathan stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost dangerous. Does Dad know? The question hit me like a slap. No, I whispered. His jaw clenched. Are you going to tell him? Panic flared in my chest. Nathan, please. I asked you a question. I swallowed hard. I don't know. His gaze burned into me, the weight of his silence heavier than anything he could have said. And then, softer, more controlled, more devastating, he said, You disgust me. I recoiled as if he had struck me. Before I could speak, he stepped back and slammed the door in my face. I stood there, breathless, trembling. And I knew without a doubt that this was just the beginning of the fallout. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the dying embers in the fireplace, my mind unraveling the events of the evening over and over again. My hands still trembled, my stomach twisted with nausea. I kept expecting to hear Nathan storm out of the house, to hear the front door slam behind him as he disappeared into the night. But he didn't. The house was unervingly silent, except for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards upstairs, reminders that he was still here, still awake, still processing what he had seen. And what was I supposed to do? Apologize? Beg? Neither option felt enough. Morning arrived like a slow, suffocating tide, creeping in through the windows, offering no relief. I heard movement upstairs, the sound of Nathan's door opening. My pulse quickened. A few minutes later, he appeared at the foot of the stairs. I had never seen him look at me the way he did in that moment, his expression cold, calculating. Not just anger, but something deeper, something final. He was holding a packed duffel bag. Panic flared in my chest. Nathan! I'm leaving. His voice was even, disturbingly so. I stood, heart racing. Please don't do this. We need to talk. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Talk! Now you want to talk. I stepped toward him, but he lifted a hand, stopping me in my tracks. Do you even love him? He asked suddenly. I froze. What? Dad. His eyes darkened. Do you even love him? The words punched the air from my lungs. I opened my mouth, but no answer came. Because I didn't know. Mark had given me stability, kindness, a home. But love, the kind that consumes you, that leaves you breathless, that makes you choose it over and over again. Had I ever truly felt that for him? Nathan must have seen the hesitation in my face because he scoffed, shaking his head. That's what I thought. Tears pricked my eyes. Nathan, it's not that simple. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he looked like the boy I had once tried so hard to connect with, guarded, wounded, aching for something he would never admit. Then his voice softened, but it wasn't kindness. It was resignation. You're just like her, you know. The words stung more than anything else he could have said. I knew exactly who he meant. His mother. The woman who had betrayed Mark before me. Nathan had spent years resenting her, had built walls around himself, so he wouldn't be hurt like that again. And now I had proven him right. The realization made my stomach churn. He shifted his duffel bag over his shoulder, glancing toward the door. I won't tell Dad. My breath hitched. You won't. His gaze met mine. Empty, unreadable. I don't owe him that pain. A pause. But I don't owe you anything either. Tears slipped down my cheeks. Nathan, please. He turned without another word and walked out the door. And just like that, he was gone. I stood there, hollow and shaking, the weight of what I had done settling deep into my bones. Because for the first time, I saw myself clearly, and I hated what I saw. Nathan never came back. At least, not in the way he once existed in this house. Mark returned from his trip 2 days later, unaware of the storm that had passed in his absence. I stood in the kitchen as he kissed my cheek, asked how my week had been, and began unpacking his suitcase as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Nathan left only a brief text. I'm staying with a friend for a while. Don't worry about me. Mark assumed it was normal for an 18-year-old, eager to assert his independence. He didn't question it. He trusted his son. He trusted me. And that trust was the heaviest burden of all. I waited for the truth to catch up to me, for Nathan to return, to tell his father everything and shatter the fragile illusion I was barely holding together. But weeks passed, then months, and the silence stretched between us like a noose, tightening with every unanswered text, every avoided call. I told myself that what I did wasn't the worst kind of betrayal, that people made mistakes, that love, if that's even what this was complicated. But deep down I knew the truth. Nathan hadn't just seen me that night. He had understood me. And that was what I couldn't escape. One evening, months later, as Mark sat beside me on the couch, laughing softly at something on the television, I caught my own reflection in the darkened window. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked the same. Same wavy brown hair, same tired eyes, but there was something missing. Or maybe something exposed. Because once someone truly sees you, the parts you keep hidden, the lies you tell yourself, you can never unsee them. And no matter how well you pretend, no matter how much time passes, you can never go back to who you were before. Nathan never told Mark. But he didn't have to. I was already living with the punishment. Because some betrayals don't need to be spoken aloud. They echo in the spaces where silence lingers. And they never really fade.